You are seeing in architecture the expressions of a society. The way we used to build has been forgotten. And so part of the challenge for us today is to look back to those things and remember, get inspired, and build better today. Okay guys, Brent Hull Build Show, talking about how design changes, talking about why our houses are ugly. Today we're looking at churches, okay? So we've looked at post offices, we look at utility buildings, now we're looking at churches. And certainly you've probably noticed that the churches, we don't really build churches the way we used to. This is a 1929 church, Gothic revival, in case you didn't guess. What I'm gonna do is when we go back to the office, I'm gonna show you how proportionally this breaks out, because this is very attractive building. It conveys what it is, right? You know that you're at a church with the steeple and the Gothic arches and everything else. It tells you what it is. Unfortunately, with a lot of new churches today, they're built like Walmarts, right? They're built so that they're tilt wall or steel wall or metal buildings, and they don't really convey that. Now, I'm not a sociologist, so I'm not really going to get into all of this stuff as far as why we build churches the way we did. What I really am more concerned about is the quality of our houses, okay, and the beauty of our houses. And I don't think it's any mystery that our houses are not as beautiful as they once were. Before 1940, houses were crafted better, they had better materials in them, they weren't built as cheaply as houses built after World War II. And it's a community-wide contagion that's taking place because all of our buildings, as you'll see in this series, step down from the quality that they used to be built with. So the Gothic revival, okay, really the Gothic period is 11 to 1400, okay, and especially in France and England when you have a lot of these cathedrals being built, those were something that spent, 100 or 200 years to build these buildings. They were incredibly well crafted, they were meticulously made, and they've stood for thousands of years. I've pointed out before that our longest lasting, best made buildings were buildings built without power tools, without computers, and those are the Gothic cathedrals and the Parthenon and the classical buildings like that from the Greek and Roman era. Those buildings were built with very low technology, completely by hand tools, and they've stood the test of time. There's something about the way we should be building. The Gothic revival and the Gothic period is really ones that really taught us about how to build beautifully. There is a two-part effort here. There was an effort to create beautiful things that lifted your eye to God, okay? And there was the engineering piece of how do we build walls that thin and that tall with holes cut out of them for windows. That's not a very strong building. A lot of those cathedrals, fell down when they were being built. One thing you don't see here, but it's behind those trees, is the flying buttress, probably the greatest architectural term that I know of. The flying buttress is a buttress, okay, that comes out from the side of the building that supports it. And if you go down the left side of this thing, you'll see these buttresses going across there that were supporting the original walls. So those Gothic revival buildings then end up telling us wonderful stories about how things were made. It has these attributes that are then copied here. So 1929, there's a whole Gothic revival movement in about 1850 with Gothic revival style houses. This is probably the last era that you see this kind of attention to detail, where you see all the cut stone, the trifoils, the quadrifoils, all the lifting up, the number of stone pieces, the brick, the organization of this thing, all being put together in a beautiful way, copying the past, looking to the past. You have plank doors. You'll notice the doors on the front of this church are those plank doors with those big iron hinges, okay? That's all part of that same period and that same medieval era, okay? Our English cottages and French cottages end up conveying that with the plank doors, with the iron hinges, with the stone surrounds, with the leaded glass, right? These are all things that we are copying and infusing into our buildings to give them more character, make them more beautiful. But it's also communicating a time period, that medieval period, pre-industrialization, when all those things were made by hand, the iron hinges, the strap doors, the leaded glass windows. All of those things were intended to communicate this story about how things used to be built. Okay, so I want to go back to the office. I'm going to show you kind of the organization, the regulating lines of how this is put together. On the way there, we're going to stop by and look at this church, okay? This is a new church built just in the last 10 years, 5 years, and how we're building differently today. Because there are churches that are putting into metal buildings. We're not going to look at that. That's too easy, okay? We'll look at one that is hinting at this kind of traditional church thing, but done in a very different way. In one respect, this maybe is a better symbol of the change that's happened in buildings than anything else we've looked at, because this is still a church trying to be a church, right? You look at this building and you don't think it's a mall, right? You don't think it's something else. It looks like an ecclesiastical building. It looks like a church. If we break down all the parts and pieces, everything has changed. Instead of wood windows, we have kind of aluminum storefront windows. They've built this in a way to make it cheap as possible, yet also still communicate the story, okay? Now, I feel like that's what we're doing on our buildings, that we're not diving into the details close enough, because when we look at Notre Dame, for instance, and then we look at that United Methodist Church, and then we look at this church, we see this Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox, right? This dumbing down and simplifying and cheapening the original process. That's why our opportunity, guys, when we copy the past, when we look at those details of the past, building more beautifully because we copy the past better. Let's go to the office. We're gonna look at that, what makes that building great. We're gonna study the Gothic Revival style. Come join me. Okay guys, let's study and talk about Gothic architecture a little bit more as we look at churches. Essentially, the United Methodist Church here in Fort Worth was designed after Notre Dame, okay, in Paris. And so if you just Google in regulating lines Notre Dame in Paris, you'll see a bunch of different things coming up and all kinds of architectural studies. Point is, it's been studied a great deal, and there is an organization and there is a reason for how it was put together. One of the things about this whole series is why our houses are not as pretty as they used to be. What happened is we no longer think about organizing and bringing the parts and pieces together like we used to. Now, if you look at this church and if you look at Notre Dame, it's broken into thirds, okay? So you've got a third here, you've got a third roughly here, roughly at that line, and then another third here. And so there is these, you know, if I drew it in circles, you'd see it there. There's another third and a third and a third between these, right? So all of these are 1/3. All of these there's a relationship between all of those, right? And so there's also this organization where if I drew a circle around here, I end up capturing a lot of the parts and pieces of how this looks. I mean, Gothic architecture, probably more than any other architecture, is filled with symbolism. The three doors here, right? All of them pointing up, all of them lifting your eyes heavenward, the trifoil and the quadrifoil and all those different circles that union and draw together. I mean, there's just, you know, endless amounts of symbolism. The reason why this is important is because, or the reason why I want to emphasize it is because all of those parts and pieces, our windows, our doors, our moldings, they all mean something. And today we end up taking moldings and we use them like stickers on the wall, or we take a column and we go, I want something traditional. So we do the column sticker or a pediment sticker. The reality is that those things mean more than just stickers, okay? Those things can be organized and can be put together in a way so that they're more beautiful. And we've talked about regulating lines before, but the placement of the windows and the placement of the doors on the building, on the facade, are not random. And they shouldn't be, and I've talked about this before, that, you know, these houses are designed from the inside out, and there are these weird rooms and stuff, and so you end up, as you look at the facade of the house, if you looked at the side of it, you might have window, 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 and then window, and then window. And it's just like, wait, what's going on? Well, we had a bathroom over here, and this was a closet, so we couldn't put that there. There used to be we would design things from the outside in, okay, as opposed to the inside out. And people will lay out their floor plan today and then go, well, what style do you want it? Oh, I don't know, something traditional or something Mediterranean. And so all of a sudden, Because we've designed the inside first, the outside is the second part. It's the kind of the leftover piece, and sometimes it can be really random and ugly. That is never the way historically we used to design, or they used to design. The whole thing was that there was a responsibility to the community, there was a responsibility to the neighborhood to build things that are beautiful, to build things that make sense. Some of the architects from those early pattern books say, look, if you want honest citizens, build honest buildings. If you want citizens with character, build buildings with character, right? And so architecture matters. Winston Churchill said, first we shape our buildings, then they shape us, right? But if we think about our houses, and Corbusier said they're tools for living. If really our houses are just tools, okay, then they're not really pretty. They don't really contribute to the beauty of a neighborhood because they're tools. Might as well just everybody build a barn because our houses are just tools for living. In reality, our houses really do matter. How they reflect our characters, they reflect our values, they reflect what we believe. I just want you to be careful when we're building, not to just stick the stickers out of, hey, I want this kind of thing, but really think about all of the things that went into and go into the design of a church or some of these classical buildings or the way we used to build, and realize that there's a lot more opportunity, there's a lot more beauty that we can infuse into our houses if we know how. So last point, right? If we're going to compare this church from the 20s versus the one that was built recently, it's clear. I mean, you walk up to them and go, oh yeah, no, that's much more reverential. That's much more important. That's much more serious, okay? Now, not saying everything needs to be serious, but everybody gets it. And the same thing is true when you're driving through a neighborhood. Some neighborhoods you're like, yeah, this is pretty cheap. Other neighborhoods you go, wow, this is beautiful, right? And so today it's very easy, quote unquote, to build a house, okay? You can build a house in 6 months. There's a process and a conveyor belt running down this line that if you get on, you're going to end up at the end of the conveyor belt with a house like everybody else. But if you go into that process, wait, I want to be careful, I want to make good selections, I want to be intentional about what I'm going to do, you won't get on that conveyor belt, you won't end up at the house like everybody else, because you're going to say, time out. Wait, why is that door there? Why are those columns on there? Let's create a story. Let's create a narrative. Let's create something so that it makes sense. Not so that it fits in the neighborhood like every other house, but so that it tells a story. And that narrative should be, how's it going to contribute to society? How's it going to improve my children? How's it going to raise the bar for craftsmanship? There are opportunities for us out there that we're not really taking. So next time we're going to look at high-rises, our downtowns, and what's happened to those. In fact, we're going to look at that in this whole series about what happened to our houses, what happened to house design.